Emily Carter noticed the silence before she noticed anything else. It followed her through the house, pressed against her chest, and sat beside her at night. It was not the peaceful kind. It was sharp and restless, like a question that refused to be answered. She felt it most in the mornings, when Daniel moved through the kitchen without looking at her. When his coffee finished brewing and he left without a word that mattered. They lived in a quiet suburb outside Portland, Oregon, in a home they once chose together with excitement and hope. The walls still held photos of smiles that felt real at the time. Friends said they were lucky. Emily used to believe that. Now she measured her days by what was missing. Daniel had changed slowly, in ways that were easy to excuse. Longer work hours, more travel, fewer shared meals. He said his job was demanding, that things would calm down soon. Emily nodded and told herself this was what marriage looked like after many years. She didn't want to be the woman who complained. She didn't want to push him away. But the distance grew anyway. Daniel worked for a tech company with offices in both the US and Canada. When he started traveling to Vancouver more often, Emily tried to be supportive. She helped him pack. She reminded him to call. At first, he did. Then the calls became shorter. Then they became texts. Then sometimes nothing at all. Emily waited without saying much. She had learned to swallow words before they reached her mouth. She believed love meant patience. She believed that if she stayed calm and kind, things would return to how they were. In Vancouver, Daniel met Sophie during a late meeting that stretched into the evening. She sat across from him at the conference table, her hair pulled back, her attention steady. When the meeting ended, she asked if he wanted coffee. It felt normal, easy. Daniel said yes without thinking. They talked about work at first, then about the city, then about life. Sophie listened in a way Daniel had not felt in a long time. She didn't rush him. She didn't look at her phone while he spoke. When he joked, she laughed. When he paused, she waited. That night, Daniel returned to his hotel with a lightness he hadn't felt in months. He told himself it was nothing. It's just a good conversation. Just relief from stress. But relief has a way of becoming something more. Back home, Emily sensed the shift without knowing its cause. Daniel smiled more when he read messages. He carried his phone everywhere. When Emily asked about his trips, his answers were short, careful, almost rehearsed. She noticed how he turned his screen away when she entered the room. Still, she said nothing. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself trust mattered more than fear. Body reacted before her mind did. Her sleep grew restless. Her appetite faded. She replayed moments in her head, searching for meaning in small gestures. One night, Daniel came home late. Emily sat on the couch waiting. When he walked in, she stood up, ready to speak. But when she saw his tired face, the words fell away. He kissed her forehead and apologized. She nodded and let him pass. She couldn't take another inch of this feeling. But she didn't tell him to stop. In Vancouver, Daniel and Sophie began meeting more often. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks through the city. They talked about childhood memories, past dreams, quiet disappointments. Daniel spoke about his marriage carefully, never crossing a line he could not return from, or so he believed. Sophie never asked him to leave his wife. She never demanded anything that made it easier. It's dangerous, but easy. Emily felt herself shrinking. Inside her own home. She still cooked, still cleaned, still asked about his day. But she no longer felt present in his life. When she reached for his hand, he held it briefly, then let go. At night, the space between them felt wide and cold. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Emily found a receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket. It was from a cafe in Vancouver. She stared at it longer than necessary, unsure why her chest tightened. Then she noticed the name written on the back, Sophie. The name stayed with her all day. She tried to ignore it. She tried to laugh it off. But something inside her shifted. The silence she had lived with suddenly had a shape. That evening, Daniel talked about his next trip as if nothing had changed. Emily listened, her heart racing, her mind loud. She wanted to ask who Sophie was. She wanted to demand answers. But fear held her still. What if she was right? What if she was wrong? What if asking destroyed what little they had left? So she stayed. Quiet. In Vancouver, Daniel felt the weight of his choices growing heavier. He knew he was standing on a line he should not cross. Yet every time he considered stepping back, the thought of losing Sophie's presence felt unbearable. She had become a place where he could breathe. Emily felt the distance stretch further. She felt it in the way Daniel's voice softened when he talked about work, in the way his eyes avoided hers when she mentioned the future. She felt it when she realized she was lonely even when he was home. She began to understand that love could exist alongside neglect, that promises could fade, without breaking all at once. One night, Emily stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the dark window. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered words she would never say out loud. She admitted to herself that she was hurting, that she was tired. She could not take another inch of this quiet pain. But she still didn't tell him to stop, and in that silence, the truth continued to grow, unseen but powerful, waiting for the moment it could no longer be hidden. Daniel never intended for things to go as far as they did, but intentions rarely stop consequences. What began as harmless comfort with Sophie had quietly become something he depended on. Their messages became longer, their calls stretched past office hours, and the laughter they shared on phone lines or during coffee breaks made him forget the distance he had created with Emily. He told himself repeatedly that he was not doing anything wrong, that he was simply seeking understanding and attention he thought he could not get at home. But the truth weighed heavily on him, even if he refused to name it aloud. Emily, meanwhile, had begun to notice patterns she could no longer ignore. Daniel's excuses for late nights became less convincing. He would return from trips looking refreshed, happier than usual, while she spent the evenings alone in the quiet house, wondering if she had failed in some invisible way. She had already taken so much: the cold dinners, the silent car rides, the empty space beside her in bed, but something inside her refused to let this pain remain unnamed. She held on to her dignity, her sense of self, and watched as Daniel slipped further from her without confronting him. One evening, Emily waited for Daniel to return from yet another business trip. The house was still, the shadows long, and the only sound came from the faint hum of the refrigerator. When the door finally opened, Daniel's presence felt different. He smiled at her, but the warmth she had known for years was gone, replaced with a careful politeness, a restraint she could feel but not touch. She did not ask about his trip, although she wanted to. She waited, studying him silently, noticing the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided her eyes. The breaking point came quietly. Emily had been sorting through laundry when she saw it, Daniel's phone left unattended on the counter. Normally, she would have ignored it, the line between curiosity and privacy clear in her mind. But something inside her snapped a need to know, a refusal to be left in the shadows any longer. She picked up the phone and scrolled, her hands steady despite the turmoil rising in her chest. The messages were there, clear and intimate, written in a tone Daniel had once reserved only for her. Emily read every line. She saw the care he expressed to someone else, the way he shared thoughts and feelings with Sophie that he had not shared with her in years. She felt the air leave her lungs in a slow, painful exhale. Her chest felt tight, as if the distance she had endured for so long had finally compressed into a single, unbearable moment. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone, feeling anger, grief, and a hollow ache that she could not name all at once. When Daniel finally returned to the bedroom, Emily was waiting. She did not yell. She did not cry immediately. She had already rehearsed the confrontation silently for weeks in her mind. She only asked, softly but firmly, "Do you love her?" The words were simple, but the weight behind them pressed down on Daniel in a way that no argument, no excuse could relieve. Daniel froze. For the first time, he could not hide behind charm or denial. The truth was unmistakable, heavy in the space between them. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words stumbled out, incomplete and weak. He told her it did not mean anything, that he was confused, that he had not planned for it to happen. Emily listened, her eyes steady on him, hearing everything and yet understanding that the damage had already been done. She realized that love alone could not repair what had been broken slowly over months, quietly in the spaces he had neglected. Emily had reached her limit long before this confrontation. She understood now that silence, patience, and endurance were not enough. She had hoped for a return to the way things had been, for the comfort of shared laughter and tender mornings. But she also knew she could not force him to care, could not force him to stay. She had taken all she could, inch by inch, and found that some injuries do not heal quietly. 2 weeks later, Emily left. She packed lightly, not out of carelessness, but because she wanted to carry only what mattered, herself, her memories, and the knowledge that she had not lost her dignity. Daniel watched her go, standing frozen in the doorway, realizing for the first time how much he had taken for granted. He understood too late that silence can be louder than anger, that absence can be heavier than words, and that trust, once broken, cannot be pieced together with excuses. Emily's departure was not a moment of hate or bitterness. 'Twas a decision rooted in self-respect, in understanding that love does not always mean holding on. She grieved for the marriage she had wanted, for the life she had imagined, but she also felt a subtle, painful relief. She had chosen herself in the way she had always deserved to be chosen. In the months that followed, Emily rebuilt her life. Quietly, she returned to work, reconnected with friends, and allowed herself to feel joy again. Small and careful at first, then growing stronger. She remembered Daniel not with anger, but with a bittersweet awareness of how deeply silence can wound. How easy it is to allow space to grow between two people, and how necessary it is to speak truth before it becomes too late. Daniel, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. Sophie remained in his life for a time, but the weight of guilt and the absence of Emily's presence forced him to confront the choices he had made. He realized that happiness built on deception is fragile, and that the longing he had sought elsewhere could not replace the intimacy he had neglected at home. Years later, Emily understood something crucial about love and endurance. She understood that sometimes love ends not because it died, but because it was stretched beyond its limits. Sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing that you cannot take another inch, yet finding the courage to leave anyway. And sometimes the truest form of love is choosing yourself when others cannot. In the end, Emily's story was not just one of betrayal. It was a story of quiet strength, of emotional survival, and of the courage to walk away from what no longer nurtured her soul. She learned that pain, while inevitable, could be transformed into wisdom, that heartbreak could coexist with hope, and that silence, once broken, could lead to liberation. She had survived the slow erosion of love, and in doing so, she had discovered the power of standing for herself, inch by painful inch, until finally she was free.